All right. I want to talk about um, what the role of a business professor is. 'Cause I think a lot of students actually get this really messed up, and the rest of the world really gets this messed up. And the sort of perception is that it's our job to get a student a job, and that is far from the truth. In fact, I think that's a relatively, I mean, it's very important. And I think it's super important for students to get a job, but I think it is kind of a trivial problem because I can get you a job almost instantly, simply by just telling you to go and apply to, your local grocery store or your local restaurant. You'll probably get a job, and that's actually really good. And it's not below me at all. In fact, I think that's what a lot of people should do. But it's a trivial problem, right? And it's a trivial thing to actually think about. You just have to get up and hustle. And so it's not intellectually a difficult thing. However, it is mentally, and requires mental toughness to get up and do that. It requires the gumption, all that kind of stuff. So it's all important stuff that I think we don't teach about, and that's an important part of the whole reciprocity project. But the issue with a professor and what we're trying to teach in business school is to get you to think about things in different ways. So when you go through and you get out, you will think about the world completely differently, and you'll have a completely different understanding of how things actually function, so that you can either create your own job, go out and do something that you would never think about doing before, like just something completely amazing where you create your own company or whatever, um, or that you find a position that better fits what you're interested in. Because it's a non-trivial problem to think about what you're interested in. It's actually really, really hard to figure out, okay, what exactly am I interested in? And if you can view the world of view education instead as kind of this unraveling of choices, or unraveling of different pathways that you can take. If you start off at in kindergarten, right, you'll probably have a pretty narrow view of the world, that it's probably primarily through the view of your parents, and which is fine and it's beautiful, and I love that. But as you progress, you got different unravelings and different views from different folks that have said something that have been interesting, that people have been paying attention to. So as it unravels, you start to get different pathways that you can take that may not be like your parents. It may be completely different, or maybe it is the same, but at least you know why you chose the route of what your parents actually chose, right? So it's unraveling, and then you get to certain points that unravels more and becomes more nuanced, and you see sort of all of these little branches, where you could think of it as like a big tree, and you're seeing all of these different branches that you can take, and the more narrow you get, and the more sort of interesting each little nuance seems, and it becomes like, wow, this is cool. Like, um, you know, if you were, in kindergarten, you never think about becoming a doctor, but some of you will become doctors and medical doctors. And then once you're a medical doctor, you would never think that you'd become a neurologist, and some of you will become a neurologist. And then when you become a neurologist, you never think about, I'm going to study um, the intersection of the one piece of the spine to the brain, and that's going to be my little specialty right there, right? And you'd never think about that. And even when you're doing that, you would never think about all these little nuances that, hey, wait a minute, there's this like nerve pathway that happens in some people and other people doesn't, and so I'm going to study this particular weird nerve pathway. And then some of you are going to look at, like, the chemical structure of it or whatever, right? Like all of these nuances that you never think are actually possible. And the job is never to find a job, right? Like the job of a professor is never to find you a job, but to get you to think about the world is like, okay, now I've gotten so much understanding. I could take a step back, take a real big step back, and I'm a neurologist, right? And I'm specializing in this little wee tiny thing. I can still go and work at a restaurant. I can still do many of the things that other people would do, right? But if I choose to, I can go in this narrow particular pathway that's right here. Now, the challenge, right, is to sort of balance that because the super narrow pathway sometimes doesn't have the market that's there, right? And what do I mean by that? Well, you might have the knowledge, you may have complete understanding of what's going on, but the world doesn't get what you're about, right? I had this, this friend of mine that was doing digital literature, right? Like real literature. I think it was in classics. So like real stuff, like really smart stuff, but like Plato and all these kind of, these old farts that have been around for a long time and understood all sorts of languages. And he was actually programming, like intensively programming. Yet, because he was doing, he was a specialist, a sort of PhD specialist in classics, people didn't get it. So his students, would end up graduating, make, hundreds of thousands of dollars, and this guy was sort of teaching them and making a fraction of what they were doing, right? And that's because there was no market for that particular thing, and you simply just have to say, instead of, you know, talking about digital, humanities or digital classics or whatever, right? If you just flipped it, you said, we're doing computer programming and I'm looking at new languages of computer programming, all of a sudden you got all sorts of understanding. And it's essentially what he ended up doing, or a whole bunch of jobs he ended up doing. He sort of left academia and did that, um, because it was just like, it didn't make any sense. It was stupid. There was no market for what he was doing. So I want you to sort of think about this. It's not our job to find you a job. That's a trivial, easy problem to do. Not trivial in the sense it's not going to take an awful lot of work, and it's a lot of gumption and getting up and stepping and just working. But it's a trivial in the sense like intellectually trivial. Um, and then it's our job to just be curious. That's it. And to make you curious, or have you ask questions that you would never think about. So hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. All right, take care. Have a wonderful day.